controversial comedian and political commentator Bill Maher had yet another fiery exchange with a Trump-supporting conservative commentator on the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, in which Maher identified and discussed Donald Trump's dangerous superpower. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have a couple of clips to look at in this video. Real Time with Bill Maher was back after a week off, and one of the people on Real Time with Bill Maher, one of his guests, was Buck Sexton, who is a conservative co-host of Clay Travis and Buck Sexton, Clay Travis being, I think, the founder of Outkick, if I'm not mistaken, and a Fox News contributor. So these guys are MAGA Republicans to the extreme. And the entire episode was wildly entertaining, but there was a really good back and forth between Sexton, Laura Coates of CNN, and Bill Maher, in which Maher pushed back on Sexton in a lot of ways, and in so doing, identified Donald Trump's superpower. And I thought this was pretty good.
Different things that Kamala Harris was very much in favor for 4 years ago that she is no longer in favor for now. And when she's asked about it, which is rare because she doesn't really appear in public unless it is to go on The View and have an amen corner, when she is pushed on it, she says something like, I haven't changed my values. I mean, this isn't like an 8th grade social studies lecture.
Okay. I must jump in as the ref here. Trump's superpower is that he's so fucking insane and that he's such a, wait a second, and that he's been such an inveterate liar about anything he just pulls out of his ass at any time, that's just baked into the cake and people accept that. Let me just tell you, this is just Trump this week. First, there was the hurricane stuff, just making shit up about the hurricane, that she's taking, he said he took her FEMA money. Kamala spent all her, like it's her FEMA money.
And I should say, just to interrupt here, that we talked about this, that local and state Republican officials, including the Republican governors of these various states impacted by Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, have publicly praised the Biden-Harris administration, FEMA, and the federal government's response, totally contradicting Donald Trump's blatant, verifiable lies. But Buck Sexton and MAGA Republicans simply don't care about that.
Billions, as if she stole it from a bank and spent it on housing illegal immigrants. We found out he calls Putin regularly, that when there was only a few COVID tests here in this country, he sent one to his buddy.
Again, the Kremlin, Putin's own, the version of the White House in Moscow, the Kremlin has confirmed that Donald Trump, as president, did indeed send COVID-19 tests to Vladimir Putin at the time when millions of Americans were desperately seeking these COVID-19 tests because they were in such short supply. And at the same time that Donald Trump was effectively withholding federal assistance to states, blue states and red states, in order to procure these preciously rare COVID tests. Red states and blue states were begging for help, and he withheld. But he still found enough time and enough supply to send them to Vladimir Putin. Treasonous, despicable stuff that would have destroyed the career of any other politician had it not been Donald Trump.
Putin. He said if Kamala's elected, it'll be the last real election. Rubbing your glue much? She went on 60 Minutes. He said after that, what she did was totally illegal. Going on 60 Minutes, that CBS should lose their license for it, and she should be forced to concede the election. My point is, this is his superpower. You don't even notice the insanity because it is ubiquitous. So you can...
That is Trump's superpower. It is his shamelessness and the frequency and egregiousness with which he lies, and the brazenness which with MAGA Republicans like Buck Sexton simply do not care and would never, ever permit, if the shoe were on the other foot, if Vice President Harris or Democrats lied with the frequency and severity of Donald Trump, Buck Sexton would be apoplectic. But because it's Trump, because it's his guy, he doesn't care. It's a staggering, dangerous hypocrisy which exacerbates the institutional disadvantages that Democrats have. We already have an uphill battle, even though our policies are preferable, even though our record is better. The fact that we have to worry about consistency and honesty and our opponents do not already advantages them, maximizes their advantages already. And it's true, Trump is just simply graded on a curve. No politician in today's media ecosystem would get away with a fraction of the stuff that Donald Trump does. And it's good that Bill Maher is pointing it out. And Buck Sexton has no answer to this. As a matter of fact, you can see he's smiling because he knows this guy's not stupid. He knows that everything Bill Maher is saying is correct. He just doesn't care because it advantages him. I should also say, even with that last example of how, or those last two examples, how 60 Minutes should have some sort of license revoked. That is a former president, potentially future president, threatening the press. President Biden has never done. President Biden has never threatened Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show. President Biden has never threatened or even suggested that the Daily Wire or Fox News should be investigated or have licenses revoked or should be punished in any sort of way. This is exclusively a Republican phenomenon. It's Republicans exclusively overtly threatening their opposition politically and in the media. Again, another staggering asymmetry. But to go back to some of the things that Buck Sexton was talking about, he talks about how Vice President Harris has flip-flopped over the span of 4 to 5 years. And it is true, she has reversed positions. And her argument is, listen, I was a legislator, I was running for office, I've now been in office as the second in command of the executive branch. I've helped President Biden govern in divided government. I recognize that even though aspirationally I still want to do all these things, I recognize the political reality, and so I'm much more focused on what I can get done. That is a coherent message about why she has moved from point A to point B. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has an even longer, richer history of flip-flopping and inexplicably. Axios actually did an article about this a couple of weeks ago. Trump fights his old policies in a series of flip-flops. Donald Trump has called Kamala Harris the greatest flip-flopper on policy issues, but if he's reelected president, Trump plans to backtrack on several positions he took during his presidency. Trump's flip-flops, like Harris, appear calculated to appeal to key groups of voters in what's expected to be an election decided by razor-thin margins. So, for examples, Trump's flip-flops include SALT caps. One key piece of legislation Trump signed into law as part of his 2017 tax cut package was a $10,000 cap on state and local tax deductions. Now he's saying if elected, he would get SALT back per a post on Truth Social. By this, Trump means he'd seek to lift a cap on those deductions that he imposed. He would undo his own damn work. TikTok ban. Trump took a hardline stance on the platform while in office, including supporting a ban on the platform over national security concerns because TikTok is owned by a Beijing-based ByteDance. In August 2020, he signed an executive order imposing sanctions on the app. But then he expressed support for TikTok earlier this year amid a bipartisan push in Congress to force divestment from TikTok. Okay, so he's flip-flopped on that. Legalizing marijuana, vaping, the filibuster. Donald Trump called for the removal of the filibuster when he was in office because he thought he would have an easier time, accomplishing his agenda, which is true. He would have had a much easier time. But then when Democrats took over, he was like, actually, no, we should preserve the filibuster so they can't get as much of their agenda accomplished. Crypto and so on and so forth. One of the most recent examples and the most stark examples was Trump flip-flopping on abortion, right? So he came out and publicly said that, the Florida's 6-week abortion ban was too draconian. And then amid a tremendous evangelical pro-forced birth backlash, he flip-flopped the next day and said actually he would vote against a constitutional amendment in Florida, which would expand abortion protections. And he would vote effectively to uphold that 6-week abortion ban. So he's flip-flopped on this. He's flip-flopped more egregiously and inexplicably compared to Vice President Harris. But the media is much more focused on Harris's flip-flops compared to Trump because Trump isn't expected to be consistent and coherent and rational. We just grade him on a curve. It's called sane washing. And I want to play one more clip from MSNBC, which talks about a completely different situation, but encapsulates many of the same ideas. Again, this double standard and Trump's superpower just being able to lie inveterately.
Trump also said in an interview with Hugh Hewitt yesterday that he's been to Gaza. But the New York Times fact-checked, Trump's worst nightmare here, fact-checked what Trump said. They said there's no record of Trump going to Gaza. And then when asked to clarify, a campaign aide said that Gaza is, quote, in Israel. And because Trump has visited Israel, Molly, Trump lies like he breathes. But at the same time, and this is the double standard we've been talking about, right? Like Tim Walz gets dinged because he made some comments about visiting Tiananmen Square in the 80s, which was a while ago, but was kind of part of my life. I mean, Molly, are Trump's comments about visiting Gaza, why are they not getting the same treatment?
Right. No, it's a false equivalency, right? The difference between making a mistake, or when you'll see like a news outlet will make a mistake and then they'll apologize, versus brazen lying propaganda. And it's really unbelievable. It happens all the time. Look, I think it's important to mention, like, if Harris had done this, people would be losing their minds. And I also think, and we talked about this earlier, Trump is diminished, right? He is the oldest person ever to run for president now. He is the oldest person ever to run for president. So he is not the person he was in 2016. And I think you see that with questions like this, with answers like he's been to a place he's.
That's very true. I'll also point out again, according to the polls, many more Americans than not believe that Vice President Harris has the mental and physical fitness to be president, whereas they don't believe that about Donald Trump. Something worth noting. But again, the hypocrisy is staggering. Good on Bill Maher to point it out that Trump's superpower is that he is able to be an inveterate liar with little to no consequence compared to the relatively few and certainly less severe lies of his opponents, which are blown wildly out of proportion. This is a superpower that as the election draws near, we're going to have to contend with. And at the end of the day, I need to know what you think in the comments.